Hello. Good evening and welcome. I'll do that normal Zoom thing. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't think Margaret can.
Margaret can't. Colin, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Just
I
nod.
can hear you. Margaret's muted.
Margaret's muted. Okay.
I think he's coming up now.
Oh, I can hear you now, Margaret, I think.
Yeah, you can hear you now.
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so hello, good evening and welcome. I'll say that again. And thanks again for attending this virtual meeting of the Governance Committee, Wednesday the 8th of July already. So for those that don't know me, my name is Councillor Ian Watkinson and I'm the chair of this committee. Councillor Colin Sharples is our vice chair. Also present with me are some members of the committee and some officers. So I'm doing the preamble again. Please note this is an audio and video meeting. It's being recorded and the stream will also be live on YouTube. The web address for this is displayed on the agenda for the meeting and can be found on the council's website. Members are asked to keep their microphone on mute and only unmute when they wish to speak. Officers will present each report, after which I'll bring the application into committee. If any committee members wish to speak on an application, you should unmute your microphone and say your name and or use the raise your hand feature or the chat function in the top right hand corner so that Carol can see that you want to speak. I'll then invite you in. After the committee has considered the reports, I'll read out any representations made by members not on the committee or members of the public. Our Deputy Monitoring Officer, Dave Whelan, will repeat the motion before the vote is taken to ensure everyone is aware of what's being voted on. And I'll call each member alphabetically to vote like last time, and Dave will confirm the outcome of the decision. If the technology fails, then I will adjourn the meeting for several meetings, that'd put things back a bit, wouldn't it? Several minutes to try and resolve the issue, or if this is not possible, a new date and time will be organised. So, please can I ask all members to confirm they can see, hear and speak before the meeting begins, and I'll call out each member alphabetically. Whew. Okay, so, Councillor Bretherton.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thanks very much. Councillor Clark.
Yes, can see and hear.
Thank you very much. Councillor Amelia.
Yes, hello Ian, can hear and see you.
Hi Christine. Councillor Sharples, I can see
yes,
myself.
Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Smith.
Yes, thank you. I can see and hear.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Turner.
Can see and hear.
Thanks very much, Councillor Turner. And our officers, Gary Hall. He's sheepishly telling me he's struggling with the technology, but he's working on it. Chris Moister.
Yes, Chair, I'm here and I can see. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Dave Whelan.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair, I can see and hear.
Thanks very much. And Darren Cranfield.
Yes, Chair, I can hear and see you.
Right, okay. Well, I can see Gary because he's sat about 6 metres away from me, but he's here, so I think we can open the meeting now. Apologies, please.
No apologies, Chair.
Okay, no apologies, thanks very much. Other than I can say here that we've had apologies from the external auditors, Mark Keep and Simon Hardman. Item 2, declarations of interest. As this is a virtual meeting, if a member has a pecuniary interest, they are requested to leave the meeting completely rather than just mute their microphone. The member can rejoin the meeting following the completion of the item in question. Does anyone have any interest to declare? No, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. I have the minutes of the last meeting in front of me for approval. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thanks very much. Any queries on those? Can I sign those? Can you indicate if that's okay, please?
Yes.
Just wave at me, anybody else? Okay. Moving on. Item 4, suspension of Standing Order 33. Members are asked to approve the suspension of Standing Order 33. Arrangements have been made for members of the public to submit their representations to Democratic Services, and the meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I move that Standing Order 33 be suspended for the duration of this meeting. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. Can we take a vote on that? Can you indicate if that's okay to suspend standing orders?
Yes, Chair.
Right, okay. I can't
Chair,
see on the
Chair,
screen.
can I just,
Yeah,
Chair,
go
can
on.
I just,
Councillor Clark, yeah.
confirm that there is nobody else in this room listening to the conversations which are now going to proceed? And I was a bit concerned the other night that in fact some members may have other people in the family who are in the room at the same time. So I just concerned about that. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for confirming that, Councillor Clark. It's a good point. I'm just looking around at the officers, and we don't have any confidential items tonight, but I think it's worth noting, Councillor Clark. It's certainly something that I look at in my work elsewhere as well. Thanks very much for that. Okay. So, is that okay? We've done that vote. Item 4 is done. Oh no, we need to do it. I do apologise. I've still not caught up with this one. We're going to have to vote individually. So, we've had the seconder, so it's just to approve the suspension of Standing Order 33. Councillor Brotherton.
Yes.
Councillor Clark.
Yes.
Councillor Amelia.
Yes.
Councillor Sharple.
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Mrs Smith.
Yes.
And Councillor Angela Turner.
Why am I always last?
It's alphabetical, Angela.
I know. It was a joke.
It's a big deal about the chair. We could do it in reverse order. We'll have to have a vote on that. Though.
Yeah, sometime.
We'll think about that for next time.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thanks very much. So that moves us on to item number 5 and the appointment and employment panel. Dave Whelan's going to present this item. Dave?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report and the 2 reports that follow are all concern themselves with amending the Constitution. Normally, we would have taken these reports through a governance constitution task group, as you know. In this particular instance, because of the circumstances on which we're working due to coronavirus, we haven't gone through that constitution task group, but it is coming to governance committee for decision, and then in due course it will go, well, the intention is we'll take the reports to full council on the 22nd of July. The first report relates to the appointment and employment panel. The report states it's essentially this is an updated section in the Constitution. At the moment, the level of detail in the Constitution on this particular issue is very basic, to put it mildly. Essentially, it's just one sentence. So what we're proposing here is to include some proper terms of reference. The actual role of this committee was actually approved by full council back in October 2016. And the terms of reference which are set out here, by and large, just reflect our existing practices. There was, I think that a similar report came to Constitution Task Group, I think it was in 2018, with the view to updating these rules. At the time, it wasn't finalised because it was felt there was a lot of uncertainty over shared services. Now, obviously, much of that uncertainty has now been resolved, hence we're in a better position. In section 6 of the report, I do a very brief summary of what the provisions contain. First paragraph, appointments and employment panel. And that is basically, that section of the proposed new wording summarises the role of the panel with regard to the recruitment of certain specified senior officers, and also to deal with any disciplinary issues relating to the council's statutory officers. I should say at the outset that a number of these posts are now shared posts with Chorley Borough Council. Hence, whatever procedures we will implement will be in consultation with Chorley, and we would agree on an approach with them. For example, before Christmas, when the senior shared services posts were filled, we went through a process where there were 3 people taken from the appointments and employment panel from South Ribble, 3 from Chorley, and the 2 were combined. So everything I say is subject to that caveat. For anything that's a shared services post, it will be subject to agreement with Chorley Borough Council in terms of the precise details. In terms of the membership of the appointments and the employment panel, that's obviously decided by full council and its current membership as we speak. But there are 5 members currently on the committee, and it's a politically balanced meeting. In terms of reference, that's to deal with the recruitment of the chief executive and other specified senior officers. So the role of this committee is in part about appointment, but it's also about dealing with disciplinary issues relating to the statutory officers, namely the head of paid service, the Section 151 officer, and the monitoring officer. In paragraph 4, there's reference to the initial filter panel. We've had this filter panel operating since, as I say, October 2016. The paragraph sets out the membership of that panel. Essentially, it's 2 senior officers and the leader of the council. And their role is to consider any initial allegations or complaints against the statutory officers. The idea of this panel is that it's designed to weed out, shall we say, trivial or vexatious complaints, or if there are complaints that can be dealt with in a light touch manner, then that could be highlighted at this stage. If the filter panel decide that the complaints are of sufficient seriousness, then they would refer it to the Investigating and Disciplinary Subcommittee, the IDC. The membership of the IDC is taken from the membership of the Appointment and Employment Panel. In effect, it's a subcommittee of that. The precise membership for any individual complaint will be decided at the time. It would consist of 3 members. The role of that committee would be to undertake an initial assessment of any allegations referred to it by the filter panel concerning the statutory officers, to determine whether to commission an independent investigator, to consider whether the statutory officer should be suspended or whether that suspension should continue if the officer has already been suspended, and ultimately to consider any investigation report and make a recommendation as to sanctions. Ultimately, the final decision would rest with full council as to whether any officer would be dismissed or not. In paragraph 6 of the proposed wording, there is an explicit power stated there that in exceptional circumstances, the chair of the Appointment and Employment Panel, which at the moment is the leader, is given explicit power to suspend the chief executive prior to consideration by the IDC. Normally, it would be for the IDC to make that decision, but in exceptional circumstances, it is proposed that there should be an explicit power granted to the leader. This is in line with advice from people like the LGA. And the final paragraph, which deals with the appeals committee, this is where a process has been gone through and there's been adverse findings against the monitoring officer, but you're looking at something less than dismissal, then the officer concerned can bring an appeal. So that's a very brief run through of the relevant provisions. As I say, much of this is essentially our existing practices, but it's just that they've not been previously fleshed out in the Constitution. Hence, as I say, the proposal is that that should be the new part of the Constitution. It's for the committee to consider it, and ultimately it will be referred to full council. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. Do we have any questions? Councillor Bretherton, please. Councillor Bretherton.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I'm just looking through the proposals, and it mentions political balance on a number of occasions. Just looking at point 4, the initial filter panel. Is there a political balance in that? And if not, should there be?
David?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The filter panel is a step that we introduced into the process. It's not part of the model procedure, although you are allowed to have it. It's an additional step that we introduced, designed, as I say, to filter out vexation complaints. We've had this filter panel in place since 2016. It operated under the previous administration. It's not a committee as such, so there's no requirement for political balance. And the way it's proposed to be set up here is largely in line with the way it has operated. It would be the leader. If the complaint is against the chief executive, it would be the monitoring officer. If it's against another statutory officer, the monitoring officer wouldn't be involved, but it would be the chief executive. And the third officer referred to is the member of the leadership team with responsibility for human resources.
Thanks for that, David.
Yeah, can I make a proposal? Can I propose that we change the initial filter panel to include the leader of the opposition?
I'm going
to give a better political balance.
I think, David Whelan, do you want to come back and just explain the rationale again about that? Because I'm not sure that's appropriate, but if you just want to explain your rationale or summarise it again, David. I think I was hearing that it's not, there's not a requirement for, or political balance isn't an issue with regards to that filter, but just in case I've missed that.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Chair. You're right. There is no requirement for that filter panel to be politically balanced. It is not a committee as such. It's not a committee subject to the normal rules set out in the Local Government Act. And as I've said before, this membership, this approach has been existed in place since 2016. So it existed, throughout the previous administration and were carried over to this administration. So there is no requirement. Now, if somebody wants to suggest that it'd be a good idea that the leader of the opposition should be included, that's something for you to consider, but there is no requirement to do that.
I think on this occasion, given that we're looking to make some changes, I think we should propose it.
It's all right, Coral she had me muted. I was saying that, do we have a seconder for this proposal?
Yes, I'll second it.
Does anybody else want to come in on this?
Chair.
Councillor Sharples.
I'd just make the point that there is not a possibility that in opposition you could have more than one party equally. You might have no single opposition party. What do we do then? Depending on the balance of council.
Sounds like a question for Dave Whelan.
Sorry, Councillor, is this specifically with regard to this point? Because as I say, legally, there's no requirement, you don't have to have a member of the opposition. This is the way we've practiced for 4 years or so, and there's no requirement to have a member of the opposition on this filter panel. It's not a committee as such. It's an informal arrangement which we have introduced because we think it's good practice. The model procedure permits it, but it's not a requirement to have it. So you don't have to have the political balance. But if committee thought it was a good idea, and ultimately council thought it was a good idea to have the member of the opposition on it, then that's something you can do. It's a matter for yourself. Matter for yourselves, rather.
Thanks, Dave. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. My questions relate also to the initial filter panel. In the absence of the leader, who would actually deputise, because it's not the responsibilities for the deputy leader, even though they'll act in the absence of the leader. It's not specifically mentioned that. And my question really is also related to the appointments and employment panel in 1.1, where we've got a number of posts where there'll be a responsibility for those appointments. So it's a question of for confirmation as to whether, in fact, the filter panel will deal with all those posts, because in David's presentation, he just mentioned the statutory posts.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Do you just want to confirm that, Dave?
Yes, Chair. Firstly, with regard to the filter panel has no role with regard to the appointment side of the business. The filter panel is solely concerned with complaints against statutory officers. So in terms of the work of, the whole question of appointing to any of those posts, the filter panel has no role whatsoever. The filter panel is solely there to consider complaints against statutory officers, and as I say, it's designed to weed out, shall we say, frivolous or vexatious complaints. In terms of the point you make about if, for example, the leader is conflicted, then in accordance with normal rules, it would be the deputy leader to fulfil that role. I mean, clearly, I could add a sentence to it if that assists in the interest of clarity, but that would be the normal approach.
Well, that's fine. It needs to be written in though who's going to deputise, doesn't it, for each of these people on the panel in case one or more are not available.
Yes, Councillor, there is something already for the monitoring officer saying if he's conflicted. So I could add a sentence just to clarify that if any of the above officers are unable to act, then a suitable. I'll finesse some wording, but it'll be something to the effect that if any of those officers are unable to act, then a suitable deputy will be identified. And in terms of the leader, that would normally be the deputy leader.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whelan has said that this system has been operating for the last 4 years. Could you give me any clarification as to how often this filter panel has actually met in the last 4 years? Just to give us some overall view of how much work it has actually done.
Yes, Councillor Mrs. Smith. The filter panel has quite a limited role. It's solely concerned with complaints against 3 officers, in effect. There've been a number of occasions, though, where it has met. I don't want to go into specifics for obvious reasons, but I can think of at least 3 occasions where it has caused and met. On 2 occasions, it chose to take no action. In one other occasion, it referred the matter for investigation. So it's not something you would expect to meet very often, but certainly in recent years in South Ribble, it has met on, to the best of my knowledge, 3 occasions.
Thank you very much for that information. It's very helpful. I presume at some point we will take a vote on that, but could I just refer to number 1, which is the appointment and employment panel? I think, if I'm not mistaken, we actually have deputies in the normal way of things for that particular panel. Should that be written into this, that there is the facility to have deputies for this particular panel?
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Yeah, I think this is possibly the only committee we have where I think there is something specific written in the Constitution that does permit it. If you wish me to, if a committee wishes me to, I could certainly add a sentence to the paper just to make that abundantly clear.
I think that would be helpful so that we all are absolutely clear who is entitled to sit on that appointment and employment panel. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave. Thanks for those questions. Any other comments? Okay, well, it sounds like we've got a couple of suggestions there to add some clarification on a couple of points that I'm not hearing anybody saying that they wouldn't want to not have in there in terms of clarification. Before we come to the proposal, I'll take comments or questions from, and Councillor Foster's indicated. Sorry, apologies, Councillor Brotherton first. Thanks for that.
You said my only concern about the initial filter panel, if there is vexatious complaints, then if there's only one-sided political balance, it could go a certain way. But if there's a political balance, it might come to a different judgment.
Noted. Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair, and Councillor Brotherton brings up a point that I have sympathy for, because there's some history with this, Damien, and one of the previous administration leaders, you could argue, misused the filter panel, and unfortunately, I won't discuss it today, but quite possibly I think it would be helpful. I'm happy to discuss it privately, but I'm also happy to discuss it at the council meeting when this goes forward to council. The initial filter panel is just what it states, which is to deal with vexatious allegations and filtering those out. Any other, if they're not deemed to be vexatious, then they have got to, in my view, go forward to the IDC. Now, again, for further clarification, this initial filter panel was actually introduced by your group when it was in administration. It was asked for by, I think it was Councillor Mrs. Smith that introduced the amendment to the Governance Committee recommendations that introduced this filter panel. But when the filter panel is used properly, it is just purely for to deal with any vexatious allegations. If it is deemed not to be vexatious, then it goes straight forward to the IDC as a state. And, I, for one, see no reason to change the structure that we have in place now, as long as it's dealt with properly. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. Dave?
Yeah, just to make it abundantly clear what the role of the filter panel is. Its primary role is to consider complaints against statutory officers. It weeds out vexatious complaints. It also decides whether any action is required. So, in certainly highly exceptional circumstances, I'm thinking of one particular circumstance where a report was placed before it and it decided that no action was required. So it's, you know, it's primarily concerned about weeding out vexatious complaints, but it's also there to decide, is any action warranted, which I suppose is slightly broader than just dismissing vexatious complaints.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Any final comments on this particular proposal? Okay, well, it has been proposed and seconded, so we will need to take that to a vote, and I'll have to read through those alphabetically.
Could I just clarify, Chair, you've taken the vote on the amendment first?
I think so.
Yeah, that's, I'm just, yes.
That's right, yeah. Okie dokie, so we're taking just a vote on that proposal from Councillor Brotherton, seconded by Councillor Clark, on wanting to amend the initial filter panel. Yeah, so Councillor Brotherton.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Yes, I'm for it. I was bearing in mind when I seconded this proposal with the comments that Councillor Foster has recently made. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Councillor Amelia.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Sharples.
Against.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Turner.
Against.
Thank you very much. I guess that comes out to my casting vote. You can guess. Against. Could you confirm the outcome of the vote of that amendment, please? Dave, if you're doing that job.
Yes, there were 3 votes in favour of the amendment and 2 against. So the amendment is lost. So now you just need to. Sorry, three in favour of the amendment, 4 against. Yeah, the amendment was lost. So now you just need to move to a vote on the substantive motion, which is whether you're happy to approve the paper. I would suggest, subject to the comments that have been made in terms of adding a couple of lines about who will act as deputies and picking up on those issues.
Thanks for that, Dave. Okay, so subject to those additions, can we now take a vote on the paper itself? Back to Councillor Brotherton.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Amelia.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Sharples.
For.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Turner.
For.
Thank you very much, Councillor Turner, and I'm for as well. Do you want to give us those results, please, Dave?
Yes, Chair, that motion is passed.
Marvellous, thanks very much for that. Moving on to item 6, my neighbourhoods, and it's Dave Whelan again.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a report that proposes a change to the Constitution. So again, ultimately, we'll have to go to Council for a decision. As we know, there's been some proposed changes in terms of the workings of my neighbourhood areas. One of the first changes to highlight is proposed that we should change the title to My Neighbourhood Community Hubs. The ultimate intention is to try and build on the success of South Ribble Together, which has been considered to be a great success. The changes here are relatively minor, but I'll take you through them. So if I take you to Appendix 2, now a number of the changes there are just simply reflect the change in the title. My Neighbourhood area becoming My Neighbourhood Community Hub. First major change is in section 3. This is a wholly new paragraph. This reflects a decision of Cabinet earlier on in the year, and basically the proposal here is that for the year commencing in May 2020, My Neighbourhood Community Hubs will be granted the option to change how they operate to meet with local circumstances. And the options are set out there. They are where the area in question is parished, arrange My Neighbourhood meetings as part of parish meetings, or adopt an area committee approach, or develop a neighbourhood community development approach, or develop community partnerships with councillors and partner organisations, or a hybrid of any of the above. Whatever model that is adopted must be within existing resources. The only uncertainty here, and this is as a consequence of the coronavirus situation, we were of course hoping to start this in May 2020. Obviously things are put back, so in terms of when the precise date is that these new models will be able to start, we're still waiting for clarification on that. I would hope though by the time of the council meeting on the 22nd of July we could give you some better indication of that. If we go on then to the rest of Appendix 2, 4 is essentially as it was in terms of 3. Now in terms of 5, the wording is essentially the same, but what's happened is that for some reading, some wording in 5.1 that was 4.1 hasn't come through to the ModGov. So I'll just read you the rest of that sentence just for clarity. So 5.1 in Appendix 2 reads, My Neighbourhood community members will work in conjunction with partners and the wording that's being missed out is and the public to identify priorities and establish My Neighbourhood community plans. That's essentially how things work at the moment. Now the other area of change is with regard to decision making. It's fair to say that some officers working with My Neighbourhoods have been frustrated with the decision-making process for some time. It's a very slow and cumbersome process and has often required any number of councillors to sign off the decision. It's probably more difficult to get a My Neighbourhood decision signed off at the moment than a sort of delegated decision, which could be for a reasonably large sum of money, certainly below key decision level. So the proposal is to try and simplify decision-making processes. So 6.1 says, there's a slight change in 6.1. It says My Neighbourhood community decision-making will be by delegation to the relevant My Neighbourhood chair and My Neighbourhood vice chair in consultation with the relevant director. For the sake of clarity, that will be, in effect, a delegated decision. 6.2 says the My Neighbourhood community chair and vice chair must consult with members of the My Neighbourhood area. The My Neighbourhood community chair and vice chair must consult with members of the My Neighbourhood community hub before making any decision. And any decision must be made with the interests of the whole council in mind rather than the interests of the specific area. If you go back to the previous 5.2, there was wording there that is that they must make every effort to gain the consensus of members. We've changed that to must ensure that they consult with all members. And 6.3 now reads all decisions must be recorded in writing and details of the decisions taken and any associated expenditure recorded on the council's website. So that's just a very minor change from the previous one. Just the previous wording just said all decisions must be recorded. Didn't specifically say in writing, so we're just making that abundantly clear. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Dave. Any questions? No questions?
Councillor Brotherton. Sure.
Oh. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a bit difficult sometimes to be there quite so quickly. There's some of the things that are actually proposed on what is now 3.2, which is the options. And the first one is where the area in question is parished. Arrange my neighbourhood community hub meetings as part of parish meetings. I'm a bit concerned about this. In our my neighbourhood area, we actually have 5 parish councils, which would make the thing rather unwieldy if we were actually meeting with the parish council. What we do in the Western Parish is we actually invite all members of the parish councils to actually come to my neighbourhoods, and they can take part in them. The parish council meetings are a totally different structure to the my neighbourhood meetings. I'm sure that you know, being probably a member of a parish council, that they have a session at the beginning where there is public participation, and after that, that's the end of it. You can't then continue to be involved in the meeting. You have to sit there. So if something actually comes up that is a particular interest to you, you've either got to tell them about it at the beginning or sit there without being able to contribute. So there's a different structure to how we work, where we actually actively encourage people to be part of the meeting. So I'm a bit concerned about that, and I'm just wondering whether we actually need that particular one in view of the fact that, as Mr. Whelan has said, when you actually read again 5.1, I think it is, which was originally 4.1, where it actually says about the fact that the public and to identify neighbourhood priorities and establish neighbourhood plans, so that you're actually already working with the neighbourhoods, with the community and with the parish councils as we are at the moment. Apart from changing the names to community hubs, I have no problem with that, and I think that will probably be helpful. If it certainly encourages more people to get involved, I think that will be a good thing. Also, I did note on the paperwork that it does say May 2020, and I hope that, yes, we can have some further clarification by July as to when these particular modifications will take place, and that the parish, my neighbourhoods, can actually decide which particular way forward they want to go and which way they want to try for the next 12 months. So just a thought about that parish council one. You know, it could be particularly unwieldy, I think, particularly in areas where there are a lot of parish councils. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Did you want to come back on any of that just now, Dave?
Yeah, just a simple comment. I think it's essential for a committee to debate it. These are options, but that's all they are. And it may well be, as Councillor Mrs. Smith said, is that in her particular area, it's not a practical option, but it may well be elsewhere. So they are only options. It's you know, no one's obligated to go down that route. It's simply given the particular area the choice.
Thanks for clarifying that. Councillor Brotherton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just a comment. The neighbourhood forums in the area where I am, members of the public haven't come along, and I'm just wondering, is it normal to invite members of the public, or has that not happened yet, but it will do in the future?
Just a comment before I pass that on. You've some really bad feedback coming, Councillor Brotherton, from whenever you're dialing in there. I'm not sure if you've got a speaker on or something else, but is that what it is? All right. They're telling me it's because you're in the same room. I don't know anyway. If you can fix it, great. Dave.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, there's not a huge amount I can say. I mean, I think one of the whole ideas of my neighbourhood is to try and engage with local communities and to encourage dialogue and debate with them. And this is what I think one of the primary motivations behind these proposed changes is to have more successful, more extensive consultation and engagement with the local communities.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to endorse the comments that were made by Councillor Smith. It's a bit of an impractical option, but I know David's explained it is just an option, but it shouldn't be taken for granted. I don't think that any of these hubs are going to adopt that particular option. I can only recall my experience with the Longton and New Longton Parish Council, where in fact the meetings can go on all night, and it's under the control of the chairman of the parish council. And I can see it would be completely impractical as far as they're concerned. Just on the question of the decision making, presumably this will be in accordance with our usual procedure on delegated decisions, where in fact it's in writing and there is a register kept in writing, which is signed off by several people. As far as this delegation is concerned, will it just be the two? That's the chairman and the vice chairman, or will other officers be involved in the decision?
Thanks for that, Dave.
Yes, yes, Councillor Clark. It will be a delegated decision, in fact, in accordance with our constitution. It's slightly different in the sense the decision maker will be the chair and the vice chair of the neighbourhood committee. But I think as a bigger theme, I think that's a direction I think we probably will go into in terms of some of these decisions. Most councils now have it as the members, the decision maker, in consultation with the senior officer. But apart from the consultation with the director, there would also be sign-off from finance and from legal. And it would, as I say, it will be in accordance with our constitution and our normal procedures.
Thanks very much, Dave. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Okay, Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points from myself. In respect to the parishes, it was interesting to listen to Councillor Clark and Councillor Smith, because as you're all aware, we have quarterly meetings now with all the parishes in South Ribble, and it's fair to say that they're chomping at the bit to work closely with the new neighbourhood community hubs. Each and every one of them expressed a real desire to work much closer with us. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out in the next 12 months. Councillor Bretherton mentioned about attendance, and that's, Damien, one of the main reasons that the Cabinet has put forward these changes to councils, to the community hubs, because attendance wasn't particularly good across the board. And as such, we needed to re-engage with our local communities. So I absolutely agree with that. And I think the final comment from me regarding another comment Colin made was that clearly all these delegated decisions as well are subject to calling, Colin, because they'll be published properly, published accordingly, and as such they are then subject to calling if members deemed it appropriate. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of the discussion and debate on this item. Can you confirm what the proposal is, please? Chris? Or is it going to be Dave now? Okay, Dave's not around. I was just trying to draw him in.
You're confusing me, Chair. It doesn't say much.
Keep it on yourself there.
The recommendation is that the report proposes amended wording to the Constitution with regard to what's now known as the My Neighbourhood Area Procedure Rules, and its committee is asked to approve this paper with a view to it being referred to council. It will be the council meeting on the 22nd of July for their approval. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll go through. Do you know what? Just for a bit of fun, we'll go backwards. Just let's see if Councillor Turner's on the tones. Councillor Turner. See, big moment. She's not ready.
4.
I'm gonna turn it round again. Ange, last chance.
4.
Oh, did you say 4? Oh, go on then. Carry on going backwards. Carry on going back. Councillor Smith.
4.
Thanks very much. Councillor Sharples.
4.
Excellent. Councillor Amelia.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
4.
Thanks very much. Councillor Brotherton.
4.
Thank you very much. And I'm 4 as well. Can you confirm the outcome of the vote, please, Dave?
Yes, that motion is carried. It was a unanimous vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Takes us on to item 7 on public participation, and Dave's going to present on that one as well.
Thank you, Chair. This is the third report which is proposing a change to the Constitution. However, the difference with this report is that this is only a temporary measure. This obviously relates to the current COVID-19 situation. As a consequence of that, as we know, the government introduced regulations to allow remote meetings. Initially, our key decisions were made by way of our emergency powers. More recently, we've been having a series of remote meetings, as in the current one. We're hoping shortly to be moving to, or the intention is we'll be moving to hybrid meetings, which will be a combination of meetings attending committee as normal, combined with people dialing in. Now, the problem with these remote meetings or hybrid meetings is they can be a little slow, they can be a little cumbersome, and the desire is to try and simplify and streamline our procedures. As I said at the outset, these are proposals simply to cover the period whilst the COVID restrictions are in place. Once everything is back to normal, then these proposals would come to an end. Now, the primary proposal is with regard to public participation. Generally speaking, the council has always allowed the public extensive rights to speak at public meetings. Now, for certain committees, it's important that the public should still have a right to in particular should have a right to speak. Thinking of some of our quasi-judicial committees, licensing and planning. In planning, as members know, we currently have detailed proposals whereby 5 members can speak against a proposal and 5 in favour for up to 4 minutes each. Recently, during our remote meetings on planning committee, we've reduced that to 3 people speaking in favour, 3 people speaking against. But whilst the constitution remains the same, then each time, every time you have a planning committee, you have to waive the relevant standing order. If this particular paper is passed, we no longer need to do that. So the proposal is for planning committee moving forward that we'll still allow 3 people for and 3 people against. The applicants, of course, would also still have the right to speak. Licensing committee, the proposal is essentially the same, albeit for hearings under the Licensing Act, there may be changes there because people who've put in representations would have a right to speak. Obviously, the right to speak will be exercised remotely via Teams. It wouldn't be, as we speak at the moment, it would not be people attending the council offices. For all other committees, including full council, the proposal is that the general public would not have the right to speak. However, they would have the right to raise issues of concern. They could do so by way of written questions, and the suggestion would be that those written questions should be submitted at least 2 days before the meeting in question. So, for example, for a Wednesday meeting, any questions should be submitted to the council by noon on the preceding Monday. Now, the other issue that's flagged up, and this is really for committee to discuss. There's not a specific proposal with this. It's the question of the participation of councillors not on committee. Now, as members appreciate that, generally speaking, members not on committee have the right to attend committee and speak. The question is whether we should continue that practice in the current circumstances. Again, as with the public participation issue, this would only be for as a temporary measure. It has to be said, though, that I think there would have, if Governance Committee were minded to go down that route, I would suggest that there would have to be some exceptions. Certainly at our recent planning committee meetings, we've allowed ward members to speak on planning applications. That can be a very useful part of the planning process. Members of the public are able to go to their ward councillor can express and articulate their concerns on their behalf. So it'd be suggested that that would, if you were minded to restrict the participation of councillors not on committee, it'd be suggested that that should be one exception to it. And the other area where you may think it'd be appropriate to make an exception would be for cabinet. Obviously, by definition, everyone on cabinet is drawn from the same political party. It may be considered that it would be inappropriate to prevent opposition members from having the right to raise questions with cabinet. Although I may be mistaken, but I have heard that I think there is a recent council that has adopted that practice. I have to say, just trying to be an objective officer, I'm not entirely sure that's best practice, but ultimately it'd be a matter for yourself. So to summarise, the proposals are to limit public participation as outlined, but in terms, and just really to invite committee to debate whether they would wish to restrict the right of councillors not on committee to speak. One of the difficulties with these issues is you're dealing with a picture which is forever changing, and we don't know. I mean, it may well be that come September, October, everything's back to normal and we're just having completely normal meetings, in which case these proposals may be somewhat superfluous and redundant. On the other hand, we could still be suffering some degree of restrictions up until spring next year. We just don't know, and that's the real difficulty. But those are the proposals, Chair, and I'm happy to deal with any questions.
Thanks very much, Dave. I think it's really the right thing for us to do, to consider those. So I'm looking at my screen now and can see Councillor Brotherton's name.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My main concern is if members are restricted of attending committee meetings, and there could be restrictions in place till next spring, say, there could be a temptation there to possibly push policies through without meaningful debate. And I just think it would remove the temptation if we allowed members to participate.
Thanks for that. Councillor Clark. Same issues, by the way, Councillor Brotherton, with the feedback. I don't know if there's if you're picking up on that. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fairly happy with these temporary arrangements, except for paragraph 20, where we're restricting members to submit questions. My concern is, I don't think this is fair to members who have submitted questions that they can't participate, because one of the advantages we have is that when we get a question which isn't properly answered, we can follow it up with a supplementary question. And I think those who do take the trouble of writing in a written question should also be given the opportunity to follow that up with a supplementary question. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Clark. Councillor Turner. You're muted, Councillor Turner.
Sorry, apologies for that, Chair.
All right.
So as David Whelan explained, this is a temporary measure, and just to the current circumstances was the phrase he used. He's referring obviously to COVID-19.
I think so.
Right? Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, for the sake of clarity, yes, that is the circumstances I'm referring to, yeah.
I'm okay with this proposal, but I would like it to be considered that there should be a explicit comment that says that this will be reviewed based on the potential changing circumstances which may result in obviously the virus being controlled more. So I think people who obviously public participation and member participation being restricted will ring warning bells to some people. And I know it's now just due to the current circumstances, and I think it should be clear that it will be reviewed, on a regular basis. That would give me more comfort.
Okay, thanks for that.
Okay.
Do you want to just come back on that one, Dave?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, that's not an issue. I mean, the current regulations which allow us to have remote meetings expire in May 2021. So it would have to be reviewed certainly before then, but I'm more than happy to say we'll review it more often than that. I mean, what I haven't done in this paper, and it's quite deliberate, is try and provide any drafted wording. The idea was to agree on what the principles are. And so this paper would have to go to full council, and the intention would be to delegate powers to the Director of Governance, the monitoring officer, to just flesh out the precise wording. So I'm more than happy to say we'll keep this under review. You could say every 2 months, every 3 months, whatever's appropriate. The difficulty, as we know, is that none of us know really what's going to happen. But yeah, that won't be an issue. In terms of the whole question of councillors not on committee, as I said at the outset, it's really for the governance committee to decide. Do they want to restrict that or not? It's obviously, I first, when I wrote the report, some would say I sat on the fence, but I mean, I can see arguments for and against it. And it's really a matter for yourselves about whether you want to restrict the rights of councillors not on committee to take part at all or not. The paragraph Councillor Clark was referring to is the paragraph where I just set out where I think would, if you're going down that route, you'd have to have some exceptions. And for me, I'd say making exceptions for cabinet and planning, but you may well take the view, no, we don't want to restrict the right of councillors not on committee to speak. It's entirely a matter for yourselves. But I think there is a need to restrict public participation, as outlined in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Dave. Councillor Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm quite happy with the majority of this report. I think there is obviously some need for it with the present circumstances. As David Whelan has said, it is a moving feast almost. We don't know what's coming, and things are changing all the time. I am concerned, though, about the restriction of members to participate in the committee meetings. I think that is not a good way forward. I think they should be allowed to participate. I can't imagine really that there would be that many members who get involved in scrutiny and governance committee, and those seem to be the two that are the ones that have been restricted. I would much prefer that the members are allowed to participate in all meetings where possible. I know it's not easy. And I agree that it's sometimes a bit difficult with these. Are you muted? Are you not muted? And time actually does seem to drag sometimes. But I think we're all getting a lot better at it. I think we're all getting a lot more used to using this device. And I would like very much to see the fact that we had all members being able to participate in all the committees, unless there is some particular reason why it's restricted, maybe on licensing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Sharples.
Yeah, I think if we're going to consider restrictions that are part of a certain committee, then we can allow certain committees to have non people who are not on that committee to take part, then we should be able to do it for all. I would assume there will be a possibility that if a non-committee member wanted, if a member wanted to take part in a meeting, provided they let us know in advance, let the people know in advance, we can arrange so that we can accommodate them here, or we can arrange for them to have the access virtually at the time. They would need to let you know in advance, I assume. But I think all councillors should be able to take part in these committees.
Thanks for that, Councillor Sharples. Well, I was still muted then. It was brilliant what I said as well, but I'll just have to summarise it. Any other questions from members of the committee? Oh, Councillor Mrs. Smith. You're muted now, Margaret.
I thought it was doing so well.
That's your fault for saying it was going so well. Yeah, there you go.
I know. I thought it was doing so well this evening. Do you wish me to make that as a proposal that we actually allow all members to take part in all the committees, as I say, unless it is restricted as regards a licensing or something of that nature? And I'd be happy to make that as a proposal, an amendment to this particular paper.
Yeah, thanks very much. Dave, what's the
Sorry, just clarify. It's not, I mean, that particular suggestion was open for discussion for committee, so it wasn't as such a specific proposal, so it wouldn't necessarily have to be an amendment. If the committee wanted to do, if that's what members are minded to do, you could say, yes, we're happy with the proposed restrictions on public participation, but when it comes to participation of councillors not on committee, the current rules should just continue. Subject, as you say, Councillor, if there are exceptions for things like licensing.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think that summarised what Councillor Mrs. Smith was saying. That being said, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just for the record, being a member of the council not on committee, I wholeheartedly agree with what Margaret said and Colin. I think that the council should do everything in its powers to facilitate all councillors at all meetings. Particularly, I think it's even more important given the fact that the general public can't now directly speak at the meeting, then their elected representatives most certainly should. And I think that I think it is a challenge for democratic services. I totally understand that. But I think wherever possible, it must be facilitated. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the debate on that item. So can you, Dave, just confirm what the proposal is or are?
Well, based on the comments made by a number of councillors, the proposal is that the proposed way forward with regard to public participation as set out in the paper be accepted, and that those proposals be referred to full council, but that the issues regarding the whole question of participation of councillors not on committee, that the existing rules should continue to operate.
Okay, thanks very much. So we'll go to the vote on that. And we'll go for Yeah, that's a recommendation. Yeah, that's a recommendation. Thank you. We'll go to the vote. I can hear Councillor Brotherton's unmuted because he's whistling away there. So go on, we'll go in that order. Councillor Brotherton.
4.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Yes, I'm perfectly happy now with what's been suggested. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor Amelia.
4.
Thank you, Councillor Sharples. Thank you, Councillor Smith.
I am for it, Mr. Chairman, but could I just make a comment before we continue? Would we make it perfectly clear to all councillors that they have to, if they wish to participate, they have to make sure that they're registered so that they can take part in it? I think that's the important bit. But I'm for it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Sounds reasonable. And Councillor Turner.
4.
Thanks very much, and I'm for as well. Dave, can you confirm the outcome of that vote?
Yes, Chair, that was carried unanimously, so that the proposals with regard to public participation will be referred to full council for a final decision. The suggestion about restricting participation of councillors not on committee will not be taken forward, but in line with what Councillor Mrs Smith said, we could include just a simple guidance that if you do wish to speak, that you need to give democratic services some prior notice.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thanks very much for the reports, for the officers' support, and for everybody's participation. We'll see you all soon.